This is Marcus Washington making the cut, taking a look back at the Notre Dame Florida State win. The Irish wins 41-38 in a game that ended up being a lot more exciting than what we thought it was going to end up there in the third quarter when Notre Dame was up by 18 points. A couple of highlights. Jack Cohn in his debut, 26 of 35 for 366 yards, 4 touchdowns and an interception. Kyle Hamilton had 2 interceptions for the Irish defense. But we want to start out by looking at the offense and some of the positives that came out of it. Cohn's ability in the passing game. He took chances that we hadn't seen Ian Book take. He got the outside receivers engaged. Obviously, he got Michael Mayer engaged, as we'll talk about a little bit later, inside the passing game. He looked poised back there at times. When you really think about it, he only had 9 incompletions. 2 were drops by Mayers, and 1 was the Hail Mary at the end of regulation. So he really played a good game. Now, there was a lot of questions about the wide receiving core coming into this season. Was someone really going to step up and take the mantle of being a threat on the outside? You know, it's only one game, but Kevin Austin certainly took a huge step in that direction. He had 4 receptions for 91 yards, had the touchdown catch that on a beautiful pass by Jack Cohn. I mean, he dropped it right there in the basket. Austin makes the play, gets in. That ended up being a bigger touchdown than probably what we thought at the time being. But he certainly asserted himself as wanting to take charge of that wide receiver on the outside, making a lot of big plays for the Irish offense, and they're going to need that this season. Also, Joe Wilkins Jr. obviously only had the 1 catch, but it was a huge catch. He went up at the corner of the end zone, made a catch for a touchdown in traffic, despite the fact that as he came to the ground, he was being face masked, and then someone else from Florida State piled on at the end. I couldn't believe the Noles didn't end up with a penalty out of that. But, you know, as good as the 41 points were that the Irish scored, there's still some questions. One of the things Ian Book did was he extended plays. He knew how to move around in the pocket. It wasn't necessarily that he was going to be the second coming of Cam Newton, but he moved around the pocket. He got some yards when he needed to get some yards. He extended out some plays to look downfield. Cohn last night didn't necessarily do those things sometimes, where he just went ahead and kind of turtled up in the pocket, didn't move, didn't get out. And that's something that if Notre Dame can establish this passing game as a true threat, if he puts that on top of the passing game, I mean, this offense could be even better than what it was last night. But, you know, there were some struggles on the offensive line, which not only led to the pressure on Cohn, but led to a very pedestrian running game, something that had been the trademark of Notre Dame the last 4 seasons. The running game ended up with Kyron Williams and Tyree. They only ended up averaging 2.3 yards per carry. Between the two, 1.9 as a team. There was no room to run. This was not on the running backs. This was on the offensive line. At times they seemed overwhelmed. They couldn't even contain when Florida State only sent 4. That's something that the Notre Dame offense will need to work on. But they're not the only side of the ball that needs work on something. When we come back, we will talk about Marcus Freeman's defense in their debut and some of the concerns that was generated from there. Welcome back. This is Marcus Washington taking a look at Notre Dame's 41-38 win over Florida State last night. And now we flip to the other side of the ball. We talk about the defense. That's where a lot of questions and a lot of struggles came out. There was a couple of positives there. Kyle Hamilton is as advertised. Both of the interceptions were amazing. The ground that he covered to get those interceptions and the plays he made now on the second interception, the taking off the helmet, taking a pretty boneheaded 15-yard penalty that was completely unnecessary, was something that you don't expect out of Hamilton and his veteran status. But he was everything that makes you think that he's going to be a top 10 pick in the NFL draft. The defensive line, there was some pressure there that Notre Dame put on. Some of it was generated with blitz, some of them was not. They generated 5 sacks, and on the surface, you would say that's a pretty good night. I felt like there was some missed tackles in there, and that starts us off on some of the questioning. It could have been a fatigue thing, but in the third quarter, Notre Dame went this kind of 3-3 stat type of defense, and Florida State decided to be patient. I don't know if it's one of these things where the defense was tired, or after Florida State went for fourth down inexplicably? Did they think that Florida State was going to panic and just completely abandon the running game? I don't know what the thought process was behind it, but it cost them, because what ended up happening was Florida State started to exercise some more patience, and in doing that, they started to run the ball more. It was pretty alarming that Notre Dame gave up 264 yards worth of rushing. 151 of those came in the second half when Florida State made their charge. They didn't necessarily make the charge with the arm. It was getting runs and yards in chunks. And there was a crease. It just seemed like as the game went on, there was this little crease that allowed Florida State to run the ball up the middle, getting 5 and 6 yards at a time. Again, in the first half, they did have the big 89-yard run. But in the second half, a lot of this was just getting it 5, 6 yards here, 4, 7 yards there. It was that type of thing, which is worrisome. That was really, really worrisome. If you look at Florida State's last 3 drives that got them back into the game, it was a 15-play, 75-yard drive that ended up in a touchdown, a 12-play, 88-yard drive that ended in a touchdown, and then the 10-play drive for 46 yards that ended up with the field goal that would send the game into overtime. That's how you lose an 18-point lead in the second half. So again, the worrisome thing isn't that, Florida State ended up getting these big plays because maybe there was a failed coverage or a miscommunication. It was they just chunked and bullied Notre Dame's defense. And over the last few years under Clark Lee, we just weren't used to seeing that. And that's what happened last night. Certainly Marcus Freeman is going to have to get to the drawing board. Not an impressive debut for him. And there was a lot of concern with the defensive meltdown in the second half. The thing that you can hope for with Notre Dame is they have a week to try to start correcting this going into the game this weekend with Toledo. And they'll have to be better tackling. The blitzes have to come at a way and at a time that makes a little bit more sense. Maybe Notre Dame didn't have the depth that they thought they have in that front seven. I don't know what went wrong. Now, you can say when they needed it the most, they did get the stop, because they did get a 3 down and out at the end in overtime that eventually led to the missed field goal after the challenge on the 50-yard field goal that Florida State made. The challenge, they moved it up. Florida State won the challenge, and that winning of the challenge could have cost them the game, because then they ended up missing the field goal that they originally made, and Notre Dame wins with a field goal at the end. So again, for Brian Kelly, you can talk about all these things that went bad, but you definitely would rather have things go bad in a road win than have things go bad in a road loss where you gave up an 18-point lead. So Notre Dame, again, they play Toledo this weekend. They'll get home. Hopefully they'll address some of these things. And the 2 things to watch for is, what does the defense look like against Toledo? And can the offensive line start to get some sort of continuity and some sort of rhythm that gets the Notre Dame running game